What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today is Wednesday, November 13th, going through the week here in the NFL. Not really any game talk on today's show, but a lot of news and some discussion points that I wanted to bring up with you guys now that we are pretty much over the halfway point of the season. There's some big games coming up this week. We'll touch on them a little bit. Not really analysis or previews, but just the storylines around them. You guys will see as we go on through the show. But some of the biggest piece of news that we will talk about is the fact that the Chicago Bears made some changes this season, now firing their offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron. And also, speaking about changes, the New York Giants are reportedly thinking about benching Daniel Jones. What did Brian Daboll have to say about it? But also, General Manager Joe Shane also gave his thoughts on it yesterday, and we're going to kick off the show with that. But before we do that, a reminder to you guys, if you guys want to get involved with the show, with any questions, comments, or just any opinions you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and comments and everything you'd like to say is always a big part of what makes this show great, and we thrive on your energy and your guys' insight to go in different directions with the show and just get a feel for what you guys are saying. So if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message gets on the air and it's featured on the live shows, there's an easy way to do that. Just use the Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel, and we rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, get involved with the show. Use the Super Chat feature just by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box, and let us know what you guys are thinking here on the live shows. So now we can start off with the biggest news that was swirling around just as part of this week with the Chicago Bears. Chicago made it official yesterday morning when head coach Matt Eberflus made a statement to the media about the team's decision to fire offensive coordinator Shane Waldron after their most recent loss, a 19-3 result against the New England Patriots. And now their former passing game coordinator, Thomas Brown, will reportedly be the interim offensive coordinator and the interim play caller as well for the Chicago Bears going forward. So, sticking on Shane Waldron here for just a second, he doesn't even last a full year as the offensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears. He was hired back in January, handpicked by Matt Eberflus at that time after he departed from Seattle. And now, a few months later, just about 9 or 10 months later, he is out of a job. He's out of a job by a group decision coming from Chicago to part ways with him and just fire him just this week. And with Shane Waldron, it felt like things were at least going in the right direction. I know there was some doubts, some hesitation around Shane Waldron just because of the way things went in Seattle and how they weren't really blowing anybody away with their offense. Geno played well. He was part of that resurgence for Geno Smith. Seattle, it really didn't go as a lot of people would have liked to, and for him to be in Chicago now with so much, equity and investment in their franchise, everything for that organization, there was some hesitation, and now, it looks like those people were right to have those doubts now that, he's only lasted until the month of November, basically. So, Matt Eberflus made it clear that this was a group decision, and although things did look like they were heading in the right direction, like I said, after Week 7, before their bye week, in Week 7, they were 4-2 with a 4-game home win streak. The Chicago Bears were, they were just coming off of a win, I believe, in London against the Jacksonville Jaguars, in which I thought Chicago played very well, and I thought Caleb looked like he was starting to get it a little bit more. And, then they come off of their bye week. They play the Washington Commanders, a very anticipated game because you got Jaden against Caleb Williams on the road for Chicago with a pretty decent record, at 4-2. they go into that game and they lose, not only on the Hail Mary, which was demoralizing, but they only put up 15 points. So, you're not freaking out. You're going to have some of the bad games, right? But then in week 9, the offense puts up 241 total yards of offense, and they lose by 20 points, 29-9 to the Arizona Cardinals on the road. A very bad offensive performance. So you have that. Now you're starting to get a little bit worried. Losing by 20 points is pretty severe. Then this past week really was the straw that broke the camel's back after a 19-3 loss to the New England Patriots, and now it makes it 23 straight drives that the Chicago Bears offense has not scored a touchdown under Shane Waldron with Caleb Williams and all the weapons that they brought him this offseason. That's an ugly streak to have. Again, regardless if you're a rookie or anything like that, for the players that they have, for the number 1 overall pick, that's unacceptable for an offense. So there had to be changes. There just had to be. Maybe some people thought it might be Matt Eberflus, but we did get some changes, and it was Shane Waldron at the end. And also, mentioning Caleb Williams in there as well. He was becoming, it felt like he was becoming a lot more just like erratic with his play. Like everything just felt like it was just unorganized, discombobulated, and everything. Everything was off script. And with that, Caleb Williams became the most sacked quarterback in the NFL up until this point. He got sacked 9 times against the Patriots this past Sunday. So that's one thing. And really the biggest thing of all for this decision that obviously, has to do with Caleb. He was just not progressing at the rate that they had hoped for, or really at all, over the last couple weeks. It just didn't look at all relatively close to what they had envisioned with Caleb going through already halfway through the year. They probably didn't expect him to definitely look like this, and it just wasn't working. Something had to change for the sake of Caleb Williams. You didn't want to lose him already in the first season, and with so much that they invested in him, the level of importance and significance that it is to have the first overall pick and make it work, it's a lot on an organization. And if things start to go awry, that leash is a little bit shorter for some of these guys in these positions, like the head coach, the offensive coordinator, and all these guys. They have to make sure this pick works, because I really thought the job that Ryan Poles did in the offseason was very good. To bring in DeAndre Swift, Keenan Allen in a low-cost trade, drafting Rome Odunze after they traded the number 1 overall pick a couple years ago to the Panthers. Now they get their franchise quarterback and a legitimate number 1 receiver in Odunze. But it really just came down to Shane Waldron really just not being able to shake off the doubts and the criticisms that really followed him since Seattle. So now you look forward, and where do they go from now? With Thomas Brown now as the interim head coach, he spent last year as the offensive coordinator for the Panthers, which doesn't give much optimism considering how the Panthers looked last year with Bryce Young. But they were stuck between a rock and a hard place, honestly. They just couldn't keep Shane Waldron is what came down to it, and they figured this was better than just keeping him there the way things were going. And with Thomas Brown now in there as the play caller, he's going to have a lot on his plate, because he still has to play Green Bay twice, Minnesota twice, the Lions twice, and San Francisco and Seattle. All of their divisional games, for how good that division is probably going to get uglier before it gets better, which, it's just part of the process now until you find another voice in there that you really believe can get you to the place that you want to get to with your franchise quarterback. So in that mindset, or at least in the short term moving forward, I had a list of goals here that I wanted to see the Chicago Bears hit as they, try and progress here with Caleb Williams and not completely throw this season away. I would like to see, an improved connection with DJ Moore. That's been the one receiver that it seems like they're a step or two just offbeat with one another, and there has been some frustrations there. So for him to get on the same page and build a real connection with DJ Moore, I think is going to be great. And honestly, it's just all their pass catchers. It's looked a bit off, really, with all of them, but with really DJ Moore, it feels like it's been emphasized a little bit more. Then, I'd like to see Caleb be a little bit quicker, just a little bit more decisive with the ball. To throw it away if nothing's there, don't try to be Superman each and every play. The thing with like rookies sometimes, I feel like, in my opinion, is that, when they have all these physical talents, and Caleb really is as physically gifted as they come, but they try to do a little bit too much with it, rely on it too much, and you can't blame them too much just because they've done it in college and it's worked for them. But in the pros, after one or two times that you do try it and maybe it doesn't work, just stop trying it. It's a moment where, the offensive line might not be great, but they can block for you for like 6 seconds while you run around back there and trying to make something out of nothing. Sometimes it's just not there, so I'd like to see him go through his progression, and if it's not there, just throw it away, or just take the easy flat route or an out route to the running back or something like that. There's no problem in doing that. They don't need to hit a home run on every single play. Then also, I'd like to see the offense in general incorporate quicker developing routes. For as much as Caleb might be off a little bit with his timing, the offense, maybe he's waiting for some of these routes to get open or progress to the point where he wants to throw the ball, but it's not, developing quick enough for the offensive line to hold up and things like that. So I'd like just really both of them to be on the same page, incorporate shorter, quicker screens or things like that at the beginning of the game, so Caleb can get in a groove and things like that and start off quicker rather than just falling behind halfway through the first quarter. And obviously taking less hits and, less turnovers goes back to the decision making. If it's not there, don't try to force it. Don't try to just air it out. Just throw it away. There's no shame in doing that. And also, I'd like to see him use his legs a little bit more, but incorporate it into the game plan, right? Not just running around 20, 15 yards behind the line of scrimmage, but maybe like a read option or an RPO or things like that, scripted runs, because he is an athlete. So I'd like to see them use that and take advantage of that a little bit more than they have, obviously, through the first through the first couple of games. So that's pretty much all the news on the Bears. It's gotten bad, it's gotten worse, really, as the season has gone on, but hopefully this is a point where they could regroup and just look forward with Thomas Brown for now and then look for a really capable offensive coordinator in 2025. But we're going to move on now, and we're going to stick to talking about quarterbacks here, because while we talked about an offensive coordinator potentially being the problem in Chicago, the quarterback seems to be the problem in New York. At least that's what most fans would tell you, right? The Giants have had their complaints with Daniel Jones, and it seems like the fans have had enough. So with the bye week this week upcoming for the Giants, there are some rumors that the Giants are really considering benching Daniel Jones for the remainder of this season. We're going to talk about why that is and what the head coach, Brian Dable, had to say about it, and the general manager, Joe Shane, also had some comments to say. We'll get to that once we return after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
So we're back here now on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to discuss some more about some quarterbacks in the NFL. This time we're going to stop in New York and touch on the situation with Daniel Jones, because up until now, the Giants have had a lot of time now to reflect on their season and how it's gone so far. Now that they're in their bye week, they're going to have a lot of time, even more so now, to talk about what are the problems with this team, right? So, after a very disappointing loss, to a 2-7 Panthers team that has been the furthest thing from a functional organization, a good developing organization, to lose to them, again, 2-7 over there in Germany. Not only did you lose to a bad team, but you had to have that flight all the way back home. Just a terrible experience, I'm sure. And it's safe to say that they've reached as close as to rock bottom as you could imagine, right? I can't imagine it gets much worse than this with this group. And now the Giants, looking at them, they're tied for the worst record in the NFL. Now, currently here on Wednesday, sitting at 2-8 with the Jacksonville Jaguars down there as well at the bottom. Cleveland, Tennessee, and Las Vegas also have 2 wins, but they're ahead of them because they're 2-7. They've only played 9 games, where the Giants and the Jaguars have played 10. So those guys are a little bit further down. They could join them if all 3 of those teams lose, obviously, this upcoming week. But, going back to now this week and back on Monday, head coach Brian Daboll had his talk with the media, and he spoke about the bye week and their plans and what they were all going to do, during the bye week, right? But also, he was asked, obviously, about Daniel Jones and continuing as the starting quarterback going forward. That was a question that was asked to him just as the last couple weeks went on, after, some disappointing performances, after they've lost, their last few games. That was always one of the questions that they asked Brian Daboll, right? Just to kind of check in, make sure that nothing changed, right? And the same answer that Brian Daboll always gave was that Daniel Jones was the starter. He's our starting quarterback. There's nothing that's changed. He always said Daniel Jones is the starter, right? But this time around, he didn't say, to be fair, he didn't say that Daniel Jones wasn't going to be the starter, but he also wasn't so adamant about saying that Daniel Jones, he is the starting quarterback. He basically didn't say anything. And, last week, the most recent weeks, he said that Daniel Jones was the starter. And I think this week, he just said something like, we're going to evaluate everything, go through the tape and everything like that, and just go through a typical bye week, right? That's pretty much all that he said without me actually including the quote. But again, I know the one thing that he didn't say is that Daniel Jones, yes, is our starter going forward. So there's a little bit of a change of tone there, obviously. Then we had some reports coming from Adam Schefter of ESPN, and he gave his personal thoughts on it, I'm sure, from what he's been hearing and just his personal opinion. He felt like Daniel Jones was going to get benched and that they are probably going to start Drew Lock going forward. That's based on, his thoughts and what he's what he, I'm sure, is hearing, what he analyzes on this situation. That was his personal thoughts as well. And then General Manager Joe Shane actually talked about the bye week as well yesterday. And if the Daniel Jones' contract, this is exactly what he was asked. One of the questions that was asked to General Manager Joe Shane was whether or not Daniel Jones' contract would factor into any decision regarding his status as the starting quarterback, which is a great question. And, if you guys weren't familiar with Daniel Jones and his contract and why that question would be asked in this context, is because Daniel Jones signed that 4-year, $160 million deal, right? The one that we talked about, the one that we didn't agree with, right? That one. What we didn't really talk about that one at the time was the fact that there's no guaranteed money on the final 2 years of that deal, and he's currently on the second year of that deal. He signed it right before the 2023 season. That was the first season under it, and 2024, this year, is now the second year on it, obviously. So now, after the conclusion of this year, those final 2 years, there's no guaranteed money that the Giants actually owe to Daniel Jones, unless he continues to play this year, right, and say he gets hurt. If he gets hurt and, I'm sure if he misses some time, like a week or two or something like that, then next year's salary now all of a sudden becomes guaranteed because of that injury that he sustained, potentially, hypothetically, the rest of this year. 2025 salary would be guaranteed now instead of not being guaranteed. So that's obviously a huge deal. Without that guaranteed money, it would allow the New York Giants to move on from Daniel Jones and walk away from him being their starting quarterback and take a limited cap hit rather than a much larger one if they owed him guaranteed money. So that's why that question was posed to General Manager Joe Shane. He obviously has a lot to do with the financial decisions and the contracts and everything like that. So they asked him about it, and, based on that and why that question came up, there was some rumors that the Giants were thinking of making, a business decision and benching Daniel Jones, mainly for that reason, right? No player coach would admittedly say it's because of that reason, right? But it is something seriously to consider based on how this season has gone and how they invested in Daniel Jones, obviously over Saquon Barkley, and the Hard Knocks clips about the discussions with Saquon, the owner John Mara having a hard time sleeping at night if Saquon left and joined Philadelphia, and everything turned out the worst possible way for the Giants in that regard. So that's why, this point has come up now, because, it's gone to a point where it's at a point now with Daniel Jones where, you can't just kind of say, let's just give him more time, let's give him an opportunity with this offensive line. That excuse has kind of run its course now, and there's really nowhere else to hide or go to other than the fact that maybe they just messed this up. They just screwed this whole situation up, and they shouldn't have given Daniel Jones this contract. But, we're not faulting Daniel Jones. Obviously, if they offer you that contract, no one's not going to take it. So it's really just more so on the Giants in this situation. And obviously, General Manager Joe Shane had some comments to make about it that I wanted to include on here. When he said yesterday to the media about that question, he said, "We're going to evaluate everything the rest of the week, and the decisions we make will be football decisions. Any decisions we make moving forward as we evaluate the roster and what we're doing for the final 7 games will be football decisions," right? And it's kind of hard to argue with that point, right? It's kind of believable when you look at Daniel Jones' numbers this year, and he has a 63% completion percentage, just barely over 2,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and a 46 QBR, which is 27th in the NFL. And for you to be ranked down there and be making $40 million per year, you got to at least be in the upper quadrant, the upper third, I would imagine, for that contract. And, the Giants, we talked endlessly about the overemphasis, I believe, on the quarterback. And, the market is what the market is. I understand that. But sometimes I feel like teams just don't make that hard decision to move on from a quarterback when they're not really fully committed. And I don't think the Giants were fully in on Daniel Jones. They'll be halfway and they think, all right, he's the quarterback, let's just give him the money. One, because it could get expensive later on, but also because they're too afraid to rip off the bandage and not keep Daniel Jones around for the fear that, it's going to just, demoralize everything around their organization. So it is a hard decision. I'm not going to debate that, but I wasn't too big of a fan of this decision, and now it looks like they're going to bench Daniel Jones, right? I think they will, because whenever, like Joe Shane said, he says they're going to evaluate everything the rest of the week. The decision will be football decisions, and as we evaluate the roster and what we're doing for the final 7 games will be football decisions, much like the Chicago Bears and Matt Eberflus said when they asked him about the offense and Shane Waldron and whether or not they could change anything. Matt Eberflus similarly said, we're evaluating everything. So I feel like when anybody says that, it usually ends up with a change, right? They don't want to say it, they don't want to give anything away, but it pretty much just sentences whatever decision that they're going to make as a guarantee, in my opinion. So I feel like they're going to bench him. it's gone to that point. There's nowhere else they could go to now, and they're at the bottom of the NFL now. So it's not like changing it is going to really do too much at this point. And now looking forward just a little bit briefly here before we finish this segment. If you do move on from Daniel Jones, and I believe they will and they should, it becomes a situation where do you tear it all down? Do you completely restart? The owner, John Mara, has already said that Joe Shane and Brian Dable are more likely than not going to stay around. So it's not like they're going to have to find new coaches or a general manager. But I don't think they're going to tear it all down because, Dexter Lawrence is having a phenomenal year. They traded for Brian Burns and gave him a huge contract, so they're not going to move him. Kayvon Thibodeau, I think he's a good enough piece to keep around. Maybe you could trade a guy like Azeez Ojulari, or actually, he's going to be a free agent, so he might just move on anyway. Darius Slayton is another one they could lose in free agency, but I don't think you tear it all down because I think the offensive line has been a little bit better. They've been ravaged by injuries somewhat. Tyron Tracy looks like a good player. Obviously, Malik Neighbors is going to be a huge star, I believe, in New York. They just need, that quarterback. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out. Their decision to bank on Daniel Jones instead of Saquon hasn't worked out at all. So, benching him, whether or not it's for financial reasons, it probably is somewhat. It is what it is now. That is the part of the game and part of the NFL that organizations do have to take into account. And you don't want to do a disservice to some of the players, right, who are on the last year of their deals or still want to play for something. But, that is how it goes, unfortunately, when you have a season like this. The organization has to look further than just football and think about the organization, the finances, and things like that. So I believe Daniel Jones is going to get benched. It's just a matter of when they announce it. But yeah, that's where the situation is with the Giants at this moment. But moving on from those two topics, we're going to get into a couple discussions that I wanted to have with you guys here for the rest of the show. Starting off with two segments here, talking about the biggest flaws that we've noticed so far in each conference for each playoff team so far halfway through the NFL. We're going to start with the NFC, go through all the playoff teams, and list off some of their biggest flaws that I've noticed so far through the NFL. We're going to do the same thing with the AFC in the following segment. So don't go anywhere. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping back into the action now here with you guys, halfway through the show, we're going to look at more of the playoff pictures now in the NFL. Another week gone down, and it's starting to look a little bit more secure, a little bit more, figuring itself out now through the first 10 weeks of the NFL. And I thought, looking at more of these playoff teams, and, of course it could change around a little bit, especially in the NFC, but I thought it would be interesting to kind of talk about what, these teams' biggest flaws are, or what these teams still need to work on to strive for their biggest goals, which is obviously making it further in the playoffs and obviously getting to the Super Bowl. So we're going to talk about the NFC in this segment, then get to the AFC in a couple of minutes. But starting off from the first seed all the way through number 7, we're going to talk first about the Detroit Lions and what is their biggest flaw. It's honestly really hard to determine. I I truly struggled finding something that I thought like blatantly the Lions needed to work on. But to me, to pick something out, I figured it was going to be the secondary. Their DBs, Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch, they're very good. They've garnered a lot of the attention, a lot of the praise, especially with the interceptions by Kirby Joseph and just the overall play by Brian Branch. I've sang their praises already enough. But the cornerbacks specifically, Carlton Davis, Terrion Arnold, Amik Robertson, I'm not saying they're bad or they're blatantly bad, but they're good enough, they're solid, but the Lions right now rank 28th in passing yards allowed at about 244 yards per game, and they can't change too much of it right now. The trade deadline is obviously past us, but it's something that I think if we're gonna pick a flaw, it's gonna have to be the secondary, just because you have young players playing there, and they're not like shut down immediate guys that you think top 5 corners in the NFL. You name one of these guys for Terrion Arnold and like Ennis Rakestraw and Amik Robertson or something like that. Maybe they could eventually get there, but right now they're not like shut down island sort of guys. So that's really the one thing I could pick from. And Zadarius Smith, I'm sure, is going to help a lot with that. That's why they brought him in. But for right now, I would have to say the secondary, because everything else is kind of hard to label as a flaw. So that's the Lions. Then moving down to the number 2 seed now, the Philadelphia Eagles. And their biggest flaw to me is their game planning, their decision making that comes with some of the big moments, some of the regularity of some of the game plan during the games, because I think Nick Sirianni has been one that has been pointed to as not being a bad thing about this team just in general, but I think in some moments, as the head coach, there's going to be big points in the game where you decide to go for 3, or you go for it on 4th down, or you decide maybe to go for it just in general, and it doesn't work out. You give up field position, things like that, or usually things like that, play calling and whatnot, and all that sort of thing. Nick Sirianni has been pointed to as being, a little bit untrustworthy in that regard. So whether or not, that comes back to bite them, maybe they're too aggressive in some moments, I think that is something to watch out for this team, because everything else, they're playing great defense now. Their pass rush is looking good. On offense, it looks like they're getting it together just because all the talent that they have. But similarly, down that path as well of decision making, Jalen Hurts, whether or not he makes the right decisions on throws, he's on time with some of his throws. Some interceptions, you look at it and you're just left scratching your head as to why Jalen threw that pass anyway. So the decision making that comes with Nick Sirianni, the game management in some of the biggest moments, and also Jalen Hurts included in there are what's really worrying me about this Eagles team. And also with that game plan sort of idea, incorporating Saquon a lot more. I feel like there's too many times in games where I'm asking, where's Saquon at? Or I haven't seen Saquon touched up on in a while. I feel like with him and Derek, I'm always left desiring more. Derrick Henry, that is. So I feel like he's not used enough for how talented he is. So how they use him a lot more and stick with him is something I'm a little bit worried about with the Eagles. So that's their biggest flaw. Then with the Atlanta Falcons, to me, their biggest flaw is that their offense can't have any off days because of that defense. I don't think that defense is capable enough of, like in a way saying to the offense, you guys aren't having your best day. You guys are only scoring like 18 points or something. We got it from here. We won't allow them to get past 16 or 17 or anything like that. I feel like this defense really isn't capable of that. I feel like Kirk has to be on his game each and every game for them to really have a chance. And of course, with all the talent and everything like that, it's a lot easier when Drake London is playing like a great young player. Kyle Pitts is getting involved now. Obviously, Bijan, Darnell Mooney's looking great. But when that offense, not all offenses are going to have their best days, best weeks each and every week. We just saw with the Lions, for as good as they've been, Jared threw 5 interceptions, and offensively, they weren't playing at their best. And I feel like with the Falcons, they're prone to not having their best day on offense quite a bit. And I feel like that's where, the defense kind of isn't really capable of stepping up to the plate and completely shutting down a team. Their defense still is a little bit weak at pass rusher. Outside of A.J. Terrell and I'm forgetting the name, Jesse Bates and Justin Simmons, outside of that, all the other guys don't really fill you with a lot of confidence that they're going to step up and make plays and things like that. So, you look at some of the bad games that they have on offense against Seattle and this past week against the Saints. It wasn't great offensively, and they lost both of those games. They got blown out at home by the Seahawks, and they just lost to a 2-7 Saints team. So that's where I have my doubts about this Falcons team. If they're able to keep up this offensive performance and score like 28 points a game, then they don't really have to worry about it, kind of like the Ravens. But I feel like they're not capable of doing that just yet, and it could bite them when we get into these closer games. But moving on to another team, similarly to the Falcons, the Arizona Cardinals. It's in a way, Kyler's playing phenomenally right now, but sometimes when he's not on or he makes a mistake or two, it feels like he also has to play, blemish-free for the defense, for the rest of the team to kind of go at a very high level. And that's just, I feel like, a lot of pressure on the offense where, some guys love the pressure. Some guys are just going to have that pressure, right? Like Patrick, like Josh, like Lamar, right? But I feel like still, even when you look at all those guys, it has to be complementary. They can't just carry it week in and week out, at least not all the way to the Super Bowl, right? Once we get into the playoffs, they're going to face better defenses. The game planning is going to be better. The game's going to slow down, be more physical and things like that. It has to be complementary, and I think right now it's kind of lacking for the Arizona Cardinals in some spots with their defense. Even though it's played pretty well recently, I think that over the long haul of this season, there's been a couple moments where I would have liked to have seen them step up a little bit more, and they've been ravaged with injuries as well. But I feel like right now that's the biggest thing for the Cardinals, just finding more of that stability and getting some more help to Kyler and that offensive side of the ball is really their biggest issue for me. Then, getting into the wild card teams here, we look at the Minnesota Vikings, currently in 5th place right now in the playoffs, and to me, their biggest flaw is not being able to finish games, finish drives, and that is so frustrating for this Vikings team that started off so well with Sam Darnold playing great, the running game playing great, their defense being shut down. It's kind of slowed down a little bit. It's been stuttering over the last couple weeks, and other than the Jaguars game too, they've been giving up sacks a couple times here, more often than not. Sam Darnold has been sacked at least 3 times over the last 4 games, and injuries to Christian Darrisaw are massive, but the stalling of the offense really is something that worries me, and there's too many of those sacks, killing drives. There's too many turnovers by Sam Darnold recently as well, and there's too much settling for field goals too. I think in the game against the Rams, they struggled in the red zone to score touchdowns. There was also the first half against the Colts where they couldn't finish off drives and they just settled for field goals. They missed a couple field goals too in that game as well. And against the Jaguars, just field goals too. So being able to finish drives with the talent that they have, I think it's pivotal for them. They have to take advantage of Jefferson, Aaron Jones, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison, all these guys. They're too good to just be settling for 3 points. So that's where I think my biggest flaw for them is. Then we have the Washington Commanders. I just think they need more weapons around Jaden Daniels. Terry McLaurin's awesome. Their running game has looked very good, but Brian Robinson has missed some time with injuries. But if you look at most of the NFC teams, just in general, you look at the Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jameson Williams. They have a lot of weapons. Then the Eagles, I could rattle off all of their players, basically. Then the Green Bay Packers, they have at like 4 wide receivers they could go to. Also the 49ers with Debo, Christian, George, all these guys playing. The Commanders, you can name Terry, Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler, he's a solid piece, but Zach Ertz, Diami Brown, and like Luke McCaffrey, I think you need a little bit more of that X factor sort of guy, like the Eagles have, and all the great teams have basically. And they have a great record. They're playing very well, which is encouraging because they just need to find those pieces now, which is a lot easier than finding the right play caller, finding the coach, and finding the quarterback. They have all those things already, and they're playing very good. So if they could just find the final pieces here over the offseason, obviously, now looking forward, they're going to be in the playoff picture a lot going forward if they could just find some of those guys. And lastly here, we have the Green Bay Packers as the last seed currently in the playoffs. My biggest flaw for them is that they're really bad on third down. They're like awful on third down. With the turnovers also that we've seen from Jordan Love, it's not a huge problem, but there has been some of them where it's like that was the decision he made, like falling down, just chucking it up in that interception for the Rams game, and the interception against the Lions was killer situationally. So that's not really a huge problem, but the fact that they're struggling on third down, I think, is a problem because Green Bay is second to last in terms of third down conversion rates in the NFL. They're only second to the Carolina Panthers, and they're converting third downs on 37% so far on the year, which is like really bad. For as talented as they are, to not be able to convert third downs and just always having your defense out there on the field, it feels like you're always in a track meet, or if your defense isn't able to stop anybody, you're able to just like hurt yourself with penalties or just get off of the field on third downs regardless because you're just not good at converting it, and it's too imbalanced in that sense, right? The offense isn't doing enough on their part to kind of help out the defense, so that imbalance is what's really making me hesitant about this team. They have to make it a lot more manageable as well. A lot of the times it's third and long for a lot of these situations. So being more successful on first and second down and actually converting as well and not harming yourself with penalties is what I'd like to see more out of the Green Bay Packers. So that's all of the flaws I see in the NFC playoff picture as of right now. But for the next segment, now after we go into our next break, we're going to talk about the AFC side of things before we wrap it up with another segment here at the end. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back in just a few moments.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Thank you guys for joining me back here on the show. We just finished talking about some of the biggest flaws that I saw in the NFC playoff picture just right now, currently where we sit in Week 10. Now looking at the other side of things here in the AFC side of things and looking at the playoff teams and where I see their biggest flaws lying in through the first 10 weeks of the NFL and what they still need to work on for the second half of the year. So much like we did with the last segment, starting off from number 1 and going through number 7, starting off with the Kansas City Chiefs, their biggest flaw that I've noticed pretty blatantly has been their tackles so far. Really their left tackle situation, where initially it was Kingsley Suamataia starting, the rookie, starting there at left tackle for them, and he's had a pretty rough start to it. I was pretty surprised that he was starting initially to start the year. Then he eventually was benched for Wayne Morris, and he has been the left tackle so far. But he over the last couple weeks hasn't been that much better than Suomatia was. So, you have these two tackles here where you already benched one of them, and the other one isn't playing too great. And really in this Broncos game, they gave up a lot of pressure on that side, and even though they brought in some help, Bonito was still getting through and getting to Patrick Mahomes a good amount. It was rushing everything that was going on, and the rhythm and timing of everything just was off with this Chiefs team. And they need to execute at a good level, right? Because they're down, Hollywood Brown, Pacheco for the time being, and other players like that, Rashee Rice. They need to have their offense working at a good rate, and with the left tackle not being as dependable as you would have liked, it messes everything up. And even Jawan Taylor on the other side is definitely playing better, but I wouldn't say has been like locked down either. So it kind of reminds you of that Super Bowl, right, where Patrick Mahomes was running for his life against the Buccaneers. It's not to that degree, but that's kind of where your mind goes to when it reminds you of what, how this offense could look when the protection's not there for Patrick. But really, other than that, they're 9-0. It's not like the problems are huge at this point. But if we're gonna pick one out, it has to be the fact that it's the tackles at this point in time. So that's one thing I'm worried about here for the Chiefs. Then also now going to the number 2 seed here in the AFC so far. Right now it stands as the Buffalo Bills, and the Buffalo Bills' biggest issue for me is the fact that the chemistry with the weapons that they have. They have good players. Amari Cooper was a big addition. Obviously, Keon Coleman, recently has played a lot better as well. So all of that is great. But the fact that they've missed some time here recently, it doesn't sit too well with me. It doesn't sit too well with me because you have the weapons and you want to get into this playoff mode more like sooner rather than later, obviously, right? You want to have the chemistry and the timing down with these guys, and you don't want to just get it incorporated once you get into the playoffs. And with Amari Cooper, I'm sure still learning the offense, right, while he's out, but to have that game speed, to have that chemistry with Josh Allen is going to be huge because Josh can do enough to carry this team, to divisional rounds, conference championships, but in those moments where you need a third down, where you need to ice the game, where you need it to kind of continue the drive to go tie the game, you need to be on the same page with Amari. You don't want to lose a game or lose a down or lose an opportunity because, you thought that he was running a 7-yard out route. Instead, he runs it a little bit further and the throw is short, or he doesn't turn quick enough. Little things like that is what we're talking about, I think, with some of these really good teams where it's not blatant, but some of the little things that they still have to touch up on could make a big difference when it matters most, obviously. So they've been good. Josh has been playing at an MVP level, but getting on the same page as these guys, getting in these high-pressure situations like this upcoming week against the Chiefs are situations where I want to see them together. So we'll see if they're able to go after missing the last couple weeks here. But now moving on to number 3 seed here in the playoffs, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers, first place in the AFC North, and their biggest flaw to me is is whether or not they're able to maintain a sustainable offense, if that makes sense, right? What I mean by that is, everything's been sunshine and roses, right? Russ has come in, great decision by Mike Tomlin. Russ looks like he's playing in Seattle again. The defense is playing complementary football, and they're scoring like 30 points a game since Russell has come into the picture, right? And Pittsburgh's defense really can stifle most offenses, I can confidently say. But what I do worry about and what I do wonder is that how do they perform against high-scoring offenses, right? How do they perform against the teams that are up there, scoring 30, 28 points a game? Can their offense go toe-to-toe with them? And can there be a situation where, this defense really maybe can't get off of the field on third down, or you need this team to score at least like 26 points per game? Are you able to do that and maybe make 1 or 2 stops, not continually make these stops like they are accustomed to doing? And we got a little bit of a taste of that against the Washington Commanders, because they were scoring like 28, 29 points a game so far through the year. And the Steelers were right there with them, scoring 28 points and making critical stops at the end. But it doesn't get much bigger than this game coming up against the Ravens, right? They are, in terms of epitome of offense, that's what the Baltimore Ravens are, with the running game, with Lamar, with the receivers as well. Are they able to step up and keep up, honestly, with that Baltimore Ravens offense? Because I do believe that the Steelers defense is better than the Ravens, and the way the Ravens passing game defense has been, there's going to be opportunities there for the Steelers, I believe, to kind of have their chances to move the ball up and down the field. So can they take advantage of that? Can they score, consecutive touchdowns, not settle for field goals, all things like that really distinguish you as a good team? I'm interested to see if the Steelers can do that. I think that's still yet to be decided on. Then, moving on to the fourth team here, we got the Houston Texans. Easily, their biggest flaw to me is their offensive line. Protection hasn't been great for C.J. Stroud this year. That now their left guard Kenyon Green, he's out for the rest of the year with a shoulder injury, and currently where we sit right now, C.J. Stroud is the quarterback that's been hurried the most in the NFL. He's been hurried 47 times, and I think second place is at about 36 right now. And also, C.J. Stroud now is the second highest sacked quarterback in the NFL, right behind Caleb Williams. So it's not a territory, a stat that you want to be anywhere near, honestly, with all the expectations on CJ and this Houston Texans team for the offensive line to be worrying you as much as it is right now is something that doesn't sit well with me, along with, the injuries at wide receiver. Nico Collins should be back this upcoming week, which should help out a lot with that. But the combination of having wide receivers that don't necessarily get open as quickly as Nico and as Stephon Diggs, having those be your guys, and an offensive line that can't really protect you for that long is not a great combination, obviously. So, Nico Collins coming back should help out with that a lot, but it's something that I'm still not so sure it's going to improve that much more as we get on through the year, and it's something that is definitely concerning for me for the Houston Texans. Then, looking at the fifth seed here right now, we have the Baltimore Ravens. I'm not sure if they're going to stay here, but for right now, they're the fifth seed, and their biggest issue pretty easily is their passing defense. They've allowed the most touchdowns in the fourth quarter. They rank dead last in passing defense and allowing passing yards. They've allowed the most passing yards in the NFL through this point, and there's honestly been some close calls with this passing defense, and just the both games against Cincinnati that, if they typically go like they should in those scenarios, and Cincinnati, say, wins both of them, this record looks a lot different than what it is right now. And I'm not saying the Ravens are frauds or anything like that. Their offense is too good to be considered fraudulent. But in close games, the playoffs, you need your defense to stop somebody in the fourth quarter, right? You need them to make a stop. I think most times when they've been in these close games, it's been game-winning touchdowns by Lamar, icing it with Derrick Henry, or just running out the clock with their offense. It's never their defense stopping a team from driving down the field and, only needing a field goal or only needing a touchdown to win the game. I don't think I've seen this Ravens defense step up and shut the door completely on the defensive side of the ball, which I think they're going to need to do if I want to consider them real, Super Bowl contenders. Having a defense like that is too egregious for me right now to feel comfortable with it. So that's my biggest flaw for the Ravens as of right now. Then the Los Angeles Chargers right now are the 6th seed in the NFL, and much like the Much like the Commanders. Much like the Commanders, I think they lack that X factor guy. The game plan, the culture, the attitude, everything is there with Jim Harbaugh, much like a lot of people expected, right? Jim Harbaugh bringing in his expertise, how he is as a coach is great for this organization, right? He has the quarterback already. He's improved that defense a lot. I think they're allowing the least amount of points per game. And their offensive line is pretty solid as well. But, Lad McConkey, Quentin Johnson, Joshua Palmer, these guys, to compete with, the Travis Kelce's, the Mark Andrews, the Say Flowers, the Nico Collinses of the world, George Pickens, even if you want to throw them in there, I think they're lacking there. And when games get tough, when you're playing very good defenses, you need a guy to go out there and win one-on-ones or draw another defender over. And I just don't think they have that guy right now at this moment. And then lastly, it's almost the same exact situation with the Broncos. Their defense is great. I'll give them a lot of credit. Bo Nix is looking like the second best rookie quarterback in this class. But I think with really only having Courtland Sutton, their defense is great again. But offensively, I need them to give me a lot more security in that regard. They're 26th right now in the NFL in passing yards. So again, they're not having that many explosive plays. So I think you're going to need a couple more than what the Broncos are able to provide right now in the playoffs. And they're sitting right there at the 7th spot. So it might as well be the Broncos or the Colts maybe even if they kind of pick it up here. But the Broncos and the Chargers share similar hesitations for me in that the fact that they're lacking some of those big-name guys that I think you certainly need in the playoffs when the going gets tough and you just need a play. They're going to be doubling Courtland Sutton, so I don't know who else you go to in those moments. But that pretty much does it for the AFC. Those are my biggest concerns with all of the playoff teams up until this moment in the NFL. Leave your guys' thoughts on if you agree with me or if you have your own thoughts and flaws and doubts about some of these teams that I maybe didn't mention. But we have one more segment here to kind of preview and lead us into week 11 here in the NFL. A segment that is sort of like a what-if scenario, but more like a what would happen if this scenario happens. I'll explain a little bit more once we return after the break, but we're going to be looking at 4 games and give you guys a what-if scenario on what could hypothetically happen in these games, and we're going to talk about it. So we'll be right back with that segment. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. Just to wrap it up here, looking at week 11 here a little bit in the upcoming week for the NFL. We have some things to discuss here. Let me actually just change this for a second because it is going to bother me. Week 11 there. So we have a couple games here to look at. Just not giving previews or predictions or matchups or anything like that like we typically do, but I thought it would be cool to give a what if scenario in some of the biggest games upcoming for this week in the NFL and talk about what that would lead us to believe or think about these two teams and what we could give our conclusions on if, this team wins or if this happens in certain games. So we're gonna go through 4 of these games and follow that format to end the show here today. So looking at one of the games that I wanted to give a scenario for, we have the Atlanta Falcons playing at the Denver Broncos this upcoming week. A game that is a little bit tricky. You might look at the Falcons and think that they should win this game, but overall, the Broncos are right there with that defense. I think it's going to be a great matchup, lining up that great defense with the Falcons' great offense. So what would it mean if Bo Nix built on his last performance against the Kansas City Chiefs and say he went out there and defeated the Atlanta Falcons? What would happen? What would it mean if Bo Nix was able to do that on Sunday? And for me, if that was to happen, I'd consider Bo Nix, like I mentioned in the last segment, definitely the second best rookie quarterback in this year's draft. To go out there and, beat a playoff team, it legitimizes the Denver Broncos and, how the game goes. If they put up like 20 points and how they actually win this game, it'll say a lot. It'll give this Denver Broncos team a lot of credibility. It'll give Sean Payton a lot of credibility for going out there and drafting his guy, Bo Nix, even though, there was some doubts and some hesitation with that pick. He stuck with it, and right now Bo Nix is piecing it together. He is starting to get it a little bit more, and what a win it would have been for him to beat the reigning Super Bowl champions in Arrowhead the way that he did. But unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. Now they have a good opportunity here, and also it's a big game for the Broncos, right? You don't want to drop to 5-6 and have your playoff spot in contention. So it is a big game, and I think there would be a little bit of some doubt creeping in from Atlanta's side, from me, if they were to lose this game and say they were outscored by Denver, like they were obviously to the New Orleans Saints, and losing that game already wasn't great. So if they come back on the road and lose to the Broncos, which again most people would probably expect them to beat, the way that they lose, if they were to lose, would say a lot about the Falcons. So that's what it would mean if Bo Nix was able to go out there and win this game for the Broncos. I think we'd have some conclusions to make about this, about both teams. So that's one game I wanted to bring up. Also, another big game that we have coming up here on Sunday Night Football, it's between the Bengals and the Los Angeles Chargers. What would it mean if Cincinnati went out there on the road and beat the Chargers, and they went out there, not only beat the Chargers, but they, confidently, convincingly defeated a top-tier defense, in Los Angeles? What would that mean? What would we think about the Cincinnati Bengals in that scenario? And for me, at that point, I'd strongly consider them a playoff team because of the fact that is a great win to go into Los Angeles. And we had our doubts about the Chargers, right? We just talked about it, but they're a great defense. They're very good. And for this Bengals team, for their offense to be clicking right now, Jamar Chase just going crazy like he did last week, their offense we know is potent. But to go in there and put up points against a great defense, and not only that, but it would mean that their defense played a pretty solid game for them to win overall. So if they were able to go do that, I would strongly consider their playoff hopes to be alive. It's also a great prove-it game for both of these teams as well. Like I said, you have Cincinnati's great offense to go out and prove how great they are by beating the Chargers' great defense, and vice versa, for the Chargers' defense to go out there and potentially shut down this Bengals defense with Joe Burrow playing at an MVP level, Jamar Chase leading the NFL in receiving yards. It's a great prove-it matchup in that regard, and if they were to go out there and do that and beat the Chargers as well, I think it would build Joe Burrow's MVP case, especially if he continues on, they rattle off a streak of wins here, and he gets them into the playoffs. Joe Burrow would strongly be in consideration for that MVP, considering where the Bengals are now and how they've lost some of these games. That would be huge for Joe Burrow individually, but also the Cincinnati Bengals, because they need to win some of their tougher matchups. And we know they're going to win some of the easier ones, but beating the Chargers, beating the Steelers on their schedule are games that they have to win now, where their record stands at this moment. Then the third matchup I wanted to get to is the Ravens playing at the Pittsburgh Steelers this upcoming week. My pick for the best game on this week, that's the game I'm really looking forward to outside of just my fandom. They have two great records, two teams with fantastic records, great offense, great defense. It's a rivalry game. It's a divisional game, especially in the AFC North. Should be a great matchup overall. So what would it mean if the Steelers shock everybody and defeated the Baltimore Ravens this upcoming week? As simple as that, what would happen? What would you think if the Steelers beat the Ravens this week? Well, for me, almost all of my doubts about the Steelers team would be gone. Honestly, I think it would really legitimize this team. And I know divisional games are weird. They're anything but guarantees, right? We just saw the Browns beat the Ravens, and no one's considering the Browns a playoff team, right? And that's one of their two wins, surprisingly. But, I do understand that fact. And I know the Ravens, recently haven't been great against the Steelers. Lamar hasn't been very good either. I don't have the stats, but it's very much against his favor when he goes and plays the Steelers. So that is something that is true, obviously, about divisional games. But it's still, the Ravens. The Ravens, for a large part of this year, have had an offense just as much of a juggernaut offense as anybody would ever describe, with Derek, with Lamar having his best year yet, and he's already won 2 MVPs, and he's playing even better. And, their defense, it is what it is. They're not great. They still have good players, but, statistically, they haven't been up there where they usually should. But their offense definitely has been playing great, as good as I've honestly ever seen it play, in my opinion. So for the Steelers to go out there and beat them, I think it would mean that their offense would have to compete, like we talked about with their biggest doubt for me. They would have to compete and go point for point, usually with the Baltimore Ravens, and their defense would have to step up and, stop this potent offense for the Baltimore Ravens, or at least hold them to field goals. A lot easier said than done. So it would mean that all those things would have to happen. And if they were to go out there and beat the Baltimore Ravens, not only is that a huge win, but it directly helps their case for winning the division. At that point, I would think that they were going to win the division if they're able to beat the Ravens this upcoming week. I would even consider the Steelers conference championship, contenders, really. They could be able to go to the conference championship, where as up till now, I think they could win a playoff game. I really do think that, but can they get past, the Bills or like the Chiefs or something? I don't really know that yet. But if they were to beat the Ravens, one of the best teams in the NFL, I think it would mean that I would have to consider them amongst some of the conference championship contenders. Super Bowl would have to mean that you'd probably have to go past Patrick Mahomes, and no sane person would bet against Patrick. But this Steelers team is making it hard for me to be so pessimistic about this team. I don't like getting my hopes up and then getting disappointed, but this Steelers team is really making it hard for me to do that. Do I think they could win this week? It's a possibility, but we're going to get to the game picks tomorrow. But for right now, if the Steelers were to win, it would legitimize everything that they've done up until this point, basically. So that's the third game. And the other big game that we have this week, the last game that I wanted to talk about, is the Chiefs visiting the Buffalo Bills. And what would it mean if the Buffalo Bills ended the Kansas City Chiefs' perfect season and they gave them their first loss of the year if the Bills were to win? What would it mean if they were able to do that? I think, I think Josh Allen locks himself into being a top 2, if not the favorite, for the MVP, considering the fact that Amari Cooper might not play and Keon Coleman also might not play. And Josh Allen is still able to win, he would be the only one, the only team to beat this juggernaut Chiefs team that is still undefeated. If he's able to do that with 2 of his biggest weapons not playing, also Dalton Kincaid might not play either, that is a huge, swing in the MVP conversation. And I don't want to discredit Lamar, obviously, but there is some, voter fatigue there. I don't think a lot of people realistically want to see Lamar win again. There is that factor, obviously. So if Josh Allen was to go out there and do that, definitely a favorite, if not number 2 at worst in that MVP conversation. Also, you can argue that Buffalo, at least with a win, is the best team in the AFC, depending on how they win, of course, if there's any controversy. But if they're able to win handedly, you could at least have the discussion of whether or not the Bills are the best team in the NFL, or in the AFC, I'll say, in the AFC. If they go out there and beat the Chiefs and gave them their first loss, I think you could at least have that conversation, certainly, after a result like that. And also what it would mean for the Chiefs, it wouldn't be like a full panic, like, oh my God, they lost the game. Like, they're still going to be 9-1. No one's going to panic, but I think it would be a good, call of attention for this Chiefs team if they were to go in there and lose. And the way that they lose, I think it would kind of kick them into place and kind of get them a lot more serious about addressing maybe some of their biggest flaws or some of the things that they still need to work on. But yeah, I think it would be a huge win, really more so than not, for the Buffalo Bills, and really for them just to kind of shake off the feeling that they can't beat Patrick Mahomes and this Chiefs team. They've been on the wrong end of results recently, so if they're able to shake that and give them their first loss, it'll give them the utmost confidence now in the playoffs to know that they can beat this team and do it at home. I think it would also give more incentive for them to go out there and try to get home field advantage and, compete for that, and knowing that they could beat Patrick Mahomes and this team. It'll be huge for them, basically. But we're not going to give my thoughts on it yet. Of course, the game picks will be tomorrow, but that wraps up not only this last segment, but the entire show. I want to thank you guys for joining me today on the Chip Shot Football Podcast. Please make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. And if you want to see more of the Chip Shot Football Podcast, check out the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel for more of the live shows, but also a lot more content covering the NFL week in and week out. And on the live shows, if you want to see more of them live, you can join me every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more coverage, discussion, debates, all breaking news and everything like that around the NFL. Again, with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you again for joining me, and I'll see you guys back here tomorrow to start Week 11 in the NFL and talk about Thursday Night Football.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the